The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over the course of the next few days, we are likely going to debate a series of amendments relative to the ongoing nuclear negotiations with Iran. And it's my hope that over the course of this debate on a handful of amendments that may be offered, that the way in which we conduct this debate and the way in which these votes come out is going to unify us rather than divide us. A lot has been made over the partisan division that has been created over the past few weeks with respect to our support for negotiations, despite the fact that we have all said, Republicans and Democrats, that our priority, our hope, is that we can divorce Iran from a nuclear weapons future through negotiation rather than through military action, despite the fact that historically we have all tried to hew close to the idea that politics stops at the water's edge, that we understand the limitations of our ability to substitute ourselves for the administration when negotiating foreign policy with foreign powers. And so my hope is that this debate unites us, because there is a lot to be united about. The fact is that we all understand the catastrophe that would be wrought if Iran was able to obtain a nuclear weapon. This is a country that has pledged over and over again to wipe Israel, America's sacred ally, off the map. This is a regime that has killed Americans and has sponsored, funded, and organized terrorism all over the world. And it's not just about Iran, because we know what would happen in the region. Their Sunni rivals would have no choice but to become nuclear powers themselves. So the stakes are high, and we are all united around the common belief that it should be the policy of the United States, the policy of the Senate, to make sure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. But I want to just make a couple additional points clear that should underscore the debate that we're going to have about that simple unifying principle. The first is that these negotiations that are occurring are about the future of Iran's nuclear program. They aren't negotiations about Iran's support for terrorism or Iran's role in fighting ISIS or Iran's other weapons programs. I know this is hard to hear, because the resolution of these other pressing issues is instrumental to preserving the security of America and of our allies. But let's all be clear that this set of negotiations is about the future of Iran's nuclear program. And for Congress at this point to step in and essentially move the goalposts and say that we will only support the outcome of these negotiations if they satisfy another set of concerns that we have, grave concerns about Iran's policy in the region and the world, is disingenuous, because we all supported a sanctions regime intended to get them to come to the table and talk about their nuclear program. And frankly, it becomes easier to solve many of these other vital issues if we remove the question of Iran's potential nuclear weapons program from the laundry list of items with which we have great concerns about. Second, let's talk about the role that Congress can play and how, again, that can be unifying if we choose to do it in the right way. If the negotiations fall apart, then we are likely all going to stand together in imposing a new set of sanctions on Iran. I don't think there's disagreement at all within this body about the fact that within days of those negotiations failing, we will be back here imposing new crippling costs on the Iranian economy. And if this agreement succeeds and there is ink put to paper, then this Congress reserves the right, has the ability to statutorily stop the implementation of that agreement from going forward once we are able to review it and look at its parameters, conditions, and elements. We don't need to vote on sanctions legislation today. We don't need to vote on legislation establishing our ability to review the agreement, because we already reserve those powers. We already have the ability to pass sanctions in the event of failure or to vote on approval or disapproval in the event of success. But we aren't in the room negotiating this deal. And so if we want to respect our proper place in the constitutional order, then I think it makes sense for us to listen to those that are negotiating, who say that a bright, bold, blinking signal of division within the American political system would be detrimental to negotiations. I want to see the product of these negotiations so that I can use my power as a United States Senator to vote them up or down. But if we take steps now, if we vote on budget amendments that signal our support to take steps to undermine those negotiations by either precipitously passing sanctions legislation or setting up a process of approval or disapproval before the negotiations take place, then I am limiting and I am decreasing the likelihood that I will see that deal. We have a role to play, but that role comes at the end of these negotiations rather than in the middle. Lastly, if we are serious that the policy of the United States is to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, then we have to be serious about what the consequences of the failure of negotiations truly are. It is disingenuous to suggest that there are credible and likely options other than military action should these negotiations fail, especially if the United States Congress takes steps that allow the world community to blame us for the failure of those negotiations. Why is that? Well, because the easy thing to do would be to simply reinstate global sanctions if the negotiations fall apart, try to squeeze Iran even more tightly. But that's unlikely to happen if it's the United States that gets blamed for the failure of the negotiations. Why? Because our partners in those sanctions won't join us. They will walk away and either lift the sanctions or look to cut their own deals with Iran. It's easy to say that we'll just put the sanctions back in place, but it's impossible, at best very difficult to do, if we're doing that unilaterally. And let's be honest about what military action really means. It means setting back Iran's nuclear program by 3 to 5 years, but it also means setting off a catastrophic series of events in the region that will do great harm to our allies, great harm to U.S. security interests, drag us into a conflict that in the end will not serve U.S. national security interests, especially given the fact that it will only temporarily halt Iranian nuclear ambitions. Now, I still say that we should keep on the table the potential of military action, but we should just be honest about the fact that if we take steps to undermine these negotiations today, if we are blamed, the United States Congress, for these negotiations falling apart, then it becomes virtually impossible to put these sanctions back together, thus giving us only one option, a military option, one that has grave and consequential aftershocks for the United States and for our allies. And so, Mr. President, I simply come down to the floor knowing that we are going to set in motion a series of amendments, many of them surrounding the question of Iran's nuclear program tomorrow. I'm hopeful that the result of those will be to signal this Congress's unity, a unity that we have expressed many times over, that we will not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon, and that a negotiated settlement is the preferable way to do that, reserving for ourselves all of the inherent powers of this body to pass sanctions if they fail, to approve or disapprove the deal if the negotiations succeed. The best way to disabuse Iran of the notion that they can ever obtain a nuclear weapon is, in the next 48 hours, for this Congress to stand united in our position to guarantee a non-nuclear weapons future for Iran. I yield the floor.